The first thing I noticed was the silence, not the music inside the ballroom. I could hear that too, muffled through 12 feet of marble and glass, violin notes turning thin against the storm. But the silence outside was different, the kind that belonged to expensive places and dangerous men, the kind where even the rain sounded disciplined. I stood beneath the black awning of the Salvetter Grand, holding my mother's recipe book under my coat, and trying not to look like a woman who had rehearsed courage on the subway. "I have an appointment," I lied for the third time. The older security guard did not blink. He had a thick neck, a radio clipped to his lapel, and the dead expression of a man paid to say no in 6 languages. "With who?" "Mr. Salvetter." That got me a look. Behind him, guests moved through the revolving door in silk and dark wool. Diamonds, umbrellas, men whose coats fell open just enough for me to glimpse shoulder holsters. Somewhere inside, a room full of people was pretending this was a charity gala and not tribute night for a king nobody called that to his face. "I'm expected," I said. "By Dante Salvetter." "Yes," he smiled then, not kindly. The younger guard shifted beside him. He was maybe 22, with nervous eyes and a fresh split in his knuckles like he had punched a wall or somebody's mouth before his shift. He kept looking at the book under my coat. "I just need 5 minutes," I said. "Please." "What you need," the older guard said, "is to leave." He took my elbow. I jerked back on instinct. "Don't touch me." That was when it changed, fast. Embarrassingly fast. The older guard muttered something into my ear about crazy girls and charity scams, and the gutter being full of both. Then he pushed. I slipped on the wet stone step, hit the curb with my hip, and my bag went over. Pens, keys, my wallet, a box of sugared almonds. My mother's loose recipe cards, the ones I kept tucked inside the cover because the binding had split. They scattered into rainwater like white birds. Pain flashed up my palm. My skin had scraped open against the pavement. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then the older guard stepped back, as if the sight of me on the ground had made me less human than before. Humiliation is hot before it turns cold. I could feel both. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to crawl under the curb and stay there until the whole city forgot my name. Instead, I got on my knees and reached for the cards. One had landed face down in the gutter. One was plastered to my shoe. One floated toward the storm drain with my mother's handwriting blurring at the edges. I grabbed it too late and water smeared the ink. "Damn it," I whispered. The younger guard crouched like he meant to help, then froze when the older one snapped his name. I looked up. "Your hand is bleeding," I said. He stared at me as if I had spoken a different language. Blood welled from the split across his knuckles. Fresh, stupid, human, I tore my handkerchief in half with shaking fingers. My own palms stung. Rain ran into my eyes. I reached for him before I could think better of it. He let me wrap the cloth around his hand. Nobody in that doorway said a word. I tied the knot tight. "Hold pressure." The street went very still. A black car had pulled to the curb without me hearing it. The driver was already out. Another man opened the rear door. No one rushed. No one needed to. Men like that carried urgency inside themselves, so they never had to wear it outside. The older guard straightened so fast it was almost a bow. I followed his line of sight. The man who stepped onto the wet stone looked like the kind of problem prayers were invented for and always failed to solve. Tall, dark coat, no umbrella. Midnight hair slicked back from a face too hard to call handsome if you wanted to survive him properly. He moved with the terrifying economy of a man who had never once in his life needed to repeat himself. Other men spilled subtly into place around him, not crowding, just arranging the world. Dante Salvetter. I knew him before I had ever seen him because New York knew him, not by confession, by avoidance. By lowered voices in restaurant kitchens and old men crossing themselves when his name came up over espresso. He took in the scene in a single sweep. The wet pavement, my torn bag, the ruined cards. The older guard, the younger one with my handkerchief tied around his knuckles. Then his eyes landed on me. I had never understood what people meant when they said a room changed around someone. The sidewalk changed. He came down 1 step. 2. He stopped in front of me and bent just enough to pick up one of the soaked cards from the pavement. His ring flashed under the awning light. Silver. St. Michael with a raised sword. When he handed the card back, that cool metal brushed the inside of my wrist. I felt it there like a mark. Elena Bellini, he said, not a question. My mouth opened. He knew my name. I had spent 3 weeks trying to find a way into this building. 3 weeks being told no by receptionists, assistants, lawyers, a priest who had smiled too gently while refusing me. I had written letters, called private offices, left messages that were never returned, and the man I had come to beg already knew exactly who I was. You came without calling ahead, he said. His voice was low, calm, more dangerous for it. I tried. I know. The rain seemed to pull back from him. Ridiculous thought, true anyway. The older guard began. Sir, she claimed. Dante turned his head. That was all. The guard went white. Dante looked at the younger one instead. Who touched her? Silence. Nobody offered the older guard up. Nobody needed to. Dante had eyes. He extended his hand to me. I stared at it. Long fingers, clean nails, the signet ring dull with rain. Up, he said. I stood because not standing felt impossible. My knee wobbled. He caught my elbow, steadying me without gentleness and without cruelty either, which somehow unnerved me more. His gaze dropped to my scraped palm, then to the handkerchief tied around the younger guard's knuckles. Something changed in his face. Tiny, but I saw it. Bring her bag, he said to no one and everyone. The older guard swallowed. Mr. Salvetor, Dante did not even look at him this time. You're done here. 2 men moved, efficient, final. The guard vanished from my world. I could still hear my heart. I only need 5 minutes, I said, hating how thin my voice sounded. You needed a better entrance, he said. I should have been frightened enough to shut up. Instead, I looked at the card in my hand, its ink bleeding, and said, Your security stepped on my mother. It was irrational and true at once. For one terrible second, I thought I had made the mistake that would finish me. Then his mouth shifted. Not a smile, something more dangerous. Recognition, maybe. Little stray, he said softly, like he was naming a species he had not expected to find at his door. Possessive. Cool, not kind. I should have hated it. Maybe I did. Inside, he said. I didn't agree to. Inside, Elena. The way he said my name made agreement irrelevant. Men moved around us. My torn bag reappeared. The soaked cards were collected with obscene care. One of them held the hotel door for me as if I were a guest, and not a girl they had just watched hit the pavement. Warm air hit my face. Music swelled. Marble shone under chandeliers shaped like frozen fire. Behind me, the rain went on falling. Ahead of me, a different kind of weather waited. And when the door shut at my back, one life ended. I did not go home that night. At first, I thought Dante meant to question me in one of the private offices off the ballroom. Men kept appearing at the edge of my vision and disappearing again. Women in satin pretended not to stare. A waiter offered champagne to the wrong person and nearly dropped the tray when Dante looked at him. Instead, I was led through the gala, past a wall of white orchids and a string quartet that kept playing as if the city wasn't stitched together by men like him, and into a private elevator lined in smoked mirror. Dante stood beside me, not touching, not crowding. The difference between those things and safety became very small very quickly. I could smell rain still on his coat, clean wool, something colder beneath it. Night air, metal. The elevator rose in perfect silence. You know my name, I said. Yes, how? He looked at my reflection, not at me. We'll get there. I didn't come here to be managed. No, he said. You came here desperate. The word hit because it was accurate. The elevator opened into a private penthouse that looked less like a home than a truce between wealth and war. Long windows over the Black River. Cream stone. Dark wood. Paintings that had probably survived countries. And silence, armed, expensive silence. A woman in her 50s appeared from a side hall wiping flour from her hands onto a kitchen towel. She had silver threaded through dark hair and the unimpressed expression of someone who had seen enough men with guns to stop noticing them. Her eyes went to my scraped palm immediately. Madonna, she muttered. She's bleeding. This is Teresa, Dante said. Teresa ignored him, which startled me more than the penthouse had. This is a disaster, she said to me, taking my chin in her fingers as if I were 12. Sit. No, not there, you'll stain the silk. Here. I sat where she pointed. A second man came in carrying my bag, and looking deeply offended by existence itself. He was handsome in a crumpled way, with expressive eyebrows and the body of somebody who lived in a gym and resented every minute. Do you know, he said to nobody, that I was 12 hours into fasting? Teresa didn't glance at him. Then God has seen fit to humble you. He pointed at the kitchen. There was tiramisu in there. I could smell it from the elevator. This is Nico, Dante said. Nico pressed a hand to his chest. Driver, logistics, underappreciated genius, also a victim of this household. Teresa keeps trying to kill me with butter. Teresa finally looked at him. If butter kills you, I'll wear black to the funeral. It happened so fast I laughed before I could stop myself. Every head in the room turned, not because I had laughed, because I had laughed there. Dante's gaze settled on me. I lost the sound in my throat. Teresa tutted as if she had personally invented breathing. Nico, sit down and shut up, she's in shock. I am not in shock, I said. You're pale enough to haunt the wallpaper, Teresa replied. Dante removed his coat. One of the men took it and vanished. He rolled his sleeves once, revealing forearms marked not with tattoos like I had expected, but with old white scars that looked surgical until they didn't. I'll ask once, he said. Why did you come to me? I reached for my bag, then stopped when Marco Conti, I learned his name later. Though I knew already, he was the kind of man who checked exits before he checked faces, set my mother's recipe book on the table between us. He had found it. The cover was cracked blue cloth. Water darkened one corner. The spine had nearly given up years ago, but my mother kept repairing it with kitchen string and patience. That, I said, belonged to my mother. Dante's eyes stayed on my face. And before that, my father used it, while working for mine. The room chilled. I looked at him. You knew my father? I knew of him. My throat tightened. Then you know he didn't steal from your family. Nobody moved. Nico looked suddenly less funny. Teresa went very still with a roll of gauze in her hands. My father had died with the word thief hanging over him like smoke. Every landlord, every bill collector, every man who used to shake his hand had repeated it with different flavors of pity. My mother had kept saying there had been a mistake until the stress stopped her heart in our kitchen 2 years later. Dante said, Your father took something. I stood so fast the chair legs screamed on stone. He did not. Marco shifted. Nico straightened. Somewhere to my left, a gun moved under a jacket and then stopped when Dante raised one finger. I was breathing too hard. Dante watched me the way men watch lit matches near gasoline. What he took, Dante said at last, was not money. Then why did he die being called a thief? Because somebody needed him disgraced. That should have helped. It didn't. It only opened a different wound. Teresa caught my wrist before I swayed. Sit down, child. I sat. She cleaned my palm with antiseptic that burned all the way to memory. Dante said nothing while she wrapped the scrape in white gauze. When she finished, she kissed the top of my head in a distracted, maternal way that made something in my chest ache unexpectedly. I need the truth, I said. You'll have some of it, Dante said. Some. All of it gets people killed. My laugh this time had no humor in it. That line probably works on other women. He stepped closer, not enough to touch, enough to end arguments. I am not trying to make anything work on you, he said quietly. I'm trying to keep you alive. I should have believed him more than I did, less than I did. I didn't know. He opened the recipe book with strange care. Between pages of almond cake and orange syrup, my father had written numbers in pencil so faint they were almost breath. I had seen them. I had pretended not to. Numbers didn't interest me. They had interested him enough to kill him. You saw these? Dante asked. Yes, and I brought it here because I thought if anybody knew what they meant, it would be the man whose family ruined mine. Nico winced. Teresa actually shut her eyes. Marco did not react at all. Dante's face gave me nothing. Honest, he said after a moment. Would you prefer polite? No. That answer landed somewhere low and confusing. He closed the book. You don't leave this penthouse tonight. I absolutely do. No, I have a job. Not anymore, I stared. Excuse me. The hotel that employed you is owned through one of my holding companies. You walked out of the pastry kitchen at 7:13 carrying private staff access cards and a family ledger people kill for. You are not going back there. You can't decide my life. He looked at me then with such level certainty that it made anger feel childish. I already did. I hated the way silence answered him. Nico muttered, "This is why women find him unbearable." Teresa smacked the back of his head with the towel. Dante turned away first, which felt like losing something I had not agreed to want. Teresa, he said, give Alina the blue room, Marco on the hall. Nico rotates the car schedule and doubles rear entry. Nico sighed tragically. Rear entry was where I planned to sneak out for a protein bar. Teresa pointed toward the kitchen. I made cavatelli. He closed his eyes as if receiving holy torment. You'll bury me in a medium shirt and liars will call me lean. Against my will, I smiled again. Dante saw it. Then he said, without looking back, lock the kitchen after midnight. And I understood he had not meant the room. Morning in Dante Salvator's penthouse smelled like espresso, oranges, and the lie that ordinary life could happen there. I woke in a room larger than our old apartment kitchen, with sheets that felt too expensive for sleep. Someone had left clean clothes folded on a chair, cream cashmere, dark jeans, socks softer than anything I owned. My bag sat on the dresser beside my mother's recipe book, which meant somebody wanted me comfortable and watched at the same time. The windows looked over the river, iron gray under low cloud. Boats cut hard white lines through the water. Far below, Manhattan was already pretending business, and blood had nothing to do with each other. I found Teresa in the kitchen kneading dough with the efficient fury of a woman who had fed armed men for 30 years, and still considered all of them underseasoned. You bake when you're upset, she asked without looking up. I stopped in the doorway. How do you know I'm upset? You opened and closed the sugar drawer 3 times before taking any. I looked down. My hand was, in fact, on the sugar drawer. She snorted. Go on, then. If you make a mess, make it worth it. There are people who ask questions when they sense pain. Teresa handed me eggs. I loved her a little for it within 10 minutes. I found flour by instinct, butter by scent, citrus by grace. My body settled before my mind did. Whisk, fold, heat. The language of pastry had always been the only one that made sense from beginning to end. If you paid attention, ingredients told the truth. Too much heat burned. Too little made collapse inevitable. Sugar lied right up until the second it didn't. Teresa watched me zest blood oranges into cream. What are you making? I don't know yet. That means yes, you do. I smiled faintly and kept going. By the time Dante came in, I had a tray of dark tart shells cooling on the rack and a pot of sugar at hard crack. He stopped at the threshold. Men like him usually announced themselves by silence. This time it was the room reacting around him. Marco, posted near the hall, straightened. Nico, sprawled at the island pretending to read something operational and definitely eating almonds he claimed were medicinal, set the bowl down. Dante's gaze moved from me to the stovetop. You ignored your guard, he said. I went 10 feet. You ignored him. I was making pastry, not crossing a border, Nico muttered, in this house. Those are emotionally similar events. Teresa threw him a look sharp enough to cut glass. Dante stepped closer to the counter. I noticed, despite myself, where his hands were, one braced flat against the marble, the other lifting the recipe book I had left open beside the mixer. The scent. Michael Ring tapped the page once. Cool silver, soft sound, the same little shock ran through me that had on the sidewalk. What is this? He asked. I looked at the dessert. An experiment. That isn't what I asked. I wiped my hands on a towel. Dark chocolate shell, blood orange cream, burnt sugar top. Nico leaned over hopefully. Is there a name? There doesn't need to be. There absolutely does, Teresa said. Food without a name is for hospitals. I looked at the fragile caramel discs catching light on the tray. Fine. Glass Saint, Dante's eyes lifted. Why? He asked. Because it looked hard until you touched it. Because the bright part was trapped under bitter things. Because if you pressed too hard, it shattered in your hands and still cut you afterward. I said, because it sounds less embarrassing than what I was thinking. Nico gasped softly. Now I need the embarrassing one. Teresa crossed herself. Lord, preserve me from men with ears. But Dante was still watching me. I plated one, bitter chocolate at the base. Blood orange cream whipped light enough to look almost innocent. On top, a glazed sugar dome so thin it would break under the back of a spoon. He did not sit. He never seemed to collapse into furniture the way other people did. He occupied it with the same contained threat he occupied air. Try it, Teresa said to him. He looked at me, not the dessert. You first. I broke the sugar with my spoon. It cracked with a bright, delicate sound. For some reason that sound seemed to matter. I tasted it, then slid the plate toward him. He used the same spoon. No one in the kitchen reacted, but the room noticed. His expression barely changed after the first bite. Barely. I still saw the pause. Nico took that as invitation, which was how he got smacked on the wrist by Teresa with a wooden spoon. I would like to live, he said. No, you wouldn't, Teresa replied. You'd like a second helping. Dante opened the recipe book and turned to a page my mother had labeled orange almond torte. My father's faint pencil numbers ran along the margin. These measurements are wrong, he said. Not wrong, I said before I could stop myself. Shifted, his head lifted. I took the book and pointed. If the flour drops by 20 grams here and rises by 20 on the next page, it isn't a baking mistake. It's a transfer. He used balance. The kitchen went quiet. I hadn't meant to show that much. I had spent years pretending numbers blurred when I looked at them. My father had taught me patterns in secret, because he said patterns kept girls safe if they learned early enough to distrust coincidence. Dante said, How long have you known? That he hid something in this book, I swallowed, since my mother died, and you said nothing. To who? That stopped him. Nico looked between us, like he was watching thunderclouds argue. Marcos spoke for the first time all morning. Someone tried the east garage at 5:30. Teresa crossed herself again, this time with sincerity. Dante did not turn around, and, gone before we got there, camera blind spot used. Inside knowledge. Betrayal moved through the kitchen like cold water. I held the edge of the counter too tightly. This is about the book. It's about you now, Dante said. I hated how my body reacted to that sentence. Not fear, not only fear. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller than it was. Nico rose. I'll reroute the cars. And eat something green, Teresa snapped. He put a hand over his heart. At a time like this, Dante looked at Marco, no one enters this floor without my word. Then he looked back at me. The whole room seemed to narrow to the distance between us. The spoon in his hand, the sugar crack still glittering on the plate, the signet ring catching morning light. You were wrong about one thing, Alina, he said. What? My family didn't ruin yours. The words landed like a door opening somewhere dark. Then who did? He held my gaze for one long, unreadable second. That, he said, is the part that gets worse before it gets clearer. Dante, he should have sent her away before dawn. Passport, cash, 2 men, a new name. Clean, efficient, necessary. Instead, he stood in his own kitchen watching flour dust cling to her wrist and remembered rain on pavement, blood on her palm. And the impossible steadiness of her hands as she bandaged the boy who had shoved her. No pleading, no performance. Mercy offered where nobody in his world would have thought to place it. It was a liability already. When the first shot cracked against the armored glass 3 floors below, Alina dropped the spoon, and I knew someone had found me. We left the penthouse before noon under a sky the color of old knives. Nobody asked me if I wanted to go. Dante did not waste time pretending choice existed where it didn't. Marco moved first, checking the hall, the private elevator, the service route. Nico drove because apparently no one trusted anyone else with both speed and discretion, though he complained the entire time that stress made his metabolism vindictive. "I'm telling you," he said as we crossed the bridge out of the city, "terror burns calories differently. If Teresa loved me, she would pack emergency sandwiches." From the front passenger seat, Marco said, "She loves peace and quiet." Nico sighed. "Then I am doomed on both counts." I sat in the back beside Dante with the recipe book in my lap and the weight of the city falling away mile by mile. "We were heading north," Marco said, "to a house nobody used unless things were bad. Things were bad. The farther we drove, the more the world changed. Glass towers gave way to bare trees, stone walls, private roads. Iron gates that opened only after a guard in a booth checked Dante's face on a monitor twice and still looked relieved to see him in person. The house sat above a black lake, all stone and shuttered windows, the kind of place that had outlived families and would outlive this one too. Nothing about it was cozy. Even the front steps looked like they had opinions. The moment Nico stepped out of the car, something white and furious launched itself from the side lawn. He yelped. I blinked. It was a goose. Not an elegant storybook goose. A thick-necked, murder-bright demon with wet feathers and a hatred so personal it felt inherited. It came for Nico's shins with prehistoric conviction. "Again," he shouted, jumping onto the lowest step. "Why does this estate have attack poultry?" Teresa, who had apparently arrived before us and stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, said. "Because they're a better judge of character than I am." Marco kept a straight face. It was almost impressive. Nico pointed at the goose. "One day, Teresa, when we are married in another life and I am kind enough to forgive your many flaws, I will remember this betrayal." Teresa smiled slowly. "In another life, Nico, eat a vegetable." Even Dante's mouth changed for half a second. The house swallowed us whole. Inside, it smelled like cedar, old polish, and rain drying on stone. My room was on the second floor. Dante's was at the end of the same corridor. Marco stayed posted between us and the stairs with the patience of a man built to become part of the wall. I did not sleep. The lake threw moonlight across the ceiling. The sheets were cool. Every pipe in the old house had a different voice. Around midnight, thunder moved over the water like furniture being dragged across heaven. At 1 a.m, I gave up. The hallway outside my room was long and dim, lit by small lamps set in alcoves. I padded barefoot over old runner rugs until I saw a slice of warmer light near the end. Dante stood outside a closed door with one hand on the knob. He wore black sweats and a gray t-shirt that did very little to make him look less dangerous. Without the suit, without the coat, he seemed younger in no useful way, more reachable, which was worse. I should have gone back. Instead, I said softly, "You don't sleep either." He turned his head. His expression didn't change, but his shoulders did. A tiny brace, as if he had not expected to be caught unguarded in anything, even silence. "Go to bed, Alina. What's in that room?" "Nothing for you." The door behind him was painted a faded cream. On the floor beside it sat a pair of ballet slippers gone yellow with time. Not nothing, then. Before I could make the mistake of asking again, every light in the corridor cut out. The house dropped into black. I sucked in a breath. Somewhere downstairs, an alarm chirped once and died. Then men's voices came sharp through hidden radios. Dante moved at the exact speed fear does not. 1 second I was alone in the dark. The next his hand was at the back of my neck, guiding me silently against the wall, his body shielding mine. My wrist caught under his palm, the cool edge of the scent. Michael Ring pressed against my skin like a pulse that belonged to him, not me. "Quiet," he said against my hair. I was already quiet. Outside I heard tires on gravel. A gate? No, closer than that. Too close, boots hit the porch. Marco's voice crackled over the radio at Dante's hip. "North side breach, 2, maybe 3. Dante didn't answer out loud. He bent, put his mouth near my ear, and said so softly I felt it more than heard it. "If I move. You go into my room and lock the bathroom behind you." My fingers closed on his shirt before I could stop them. He went still. That was the first almost. not a kiss, not even close. Just my hand in his shirt, and the shape of him in the dark, and the terrifying realization that if he stepped away, the cold would feel worse than it had before. Someone shouted outside. A gunshot cracked over the lake, then another. Dante turned his head enough to speak into the radio. No fire near the east wing. There was a beat of silence. Marco said, understood. His room, no. The closed door. The house shuddered once with running feet. Downstairs, Nico swore loudly enough to become architecture. If I die because of rich people, geese, and tactical failures, put it on my headstone. Under any other circumstances, I might have laughed. Dante shifted, making room around me without creating distance. Bathroom, he said. I'm not leaving you in the... Alina, a command, a warning, a plea he would have killed before admitting to. I should have listened. Instead, I said the stupidest thing I could have said while armed men were on the grounds. Your hand, he glanced down. In the scramble, he'd split his knuckles on the rough plaster wall. Blood darkened two of them. Rain, pavement, my torn handkerchief on the young guard's hand. I didn't think. I reached into the pocket of my robe for a tissue, then another when the first tore. Ridiculous, useless, human, I folded them over the cut. Dante stared at my hands in the dark like they had said something. Then the shooting stopped. Voices, more engines, Marco opening the front door. Men moving through rooms with the particular silence of professionals who knew the mess could wait until the house was secure. The power came back in a warm spill. We both blinked. I became aware all at once of exactly how close we were. My hand still wrapped around his chest one breath from mine, the ring against my wrist. His gaze dropped to my mouth. That was the second almost. He stepped back first. Two men, Marco said from the stairs. Both down, one swallowed cyanide before we got a word. Dante's face closed like a blade folding. Inside help, the rear alarm was looped. A traitor, then. Dante looked once at the cream door beside him. I followed his gaze. The last place my sister slept, he said before I could ask. No softness in it. No speech either, just fact laid down like stone. I don't let gunfire near that room. My throat tightened. I didn't know what to do with grief when a man like him offered it up in one bare sentence and expected nothing in return. Dante, go back to bed, little stray. The nickname landed differently this time, still possession, less cold. He started down the hallway, then stopped without turning. She died outside a locked door, he said. I don't forget doors. He kept walking. I stayed there barefoot in the returned light, my wrist still cool where his ring had touched it, and understood something dangerous. I was no longer only afraid of him. Morning came raw and silver through the lake house windows. I found Teresa in a kitchen that looked more like a chapel to flower than a room meant for meals. Wide pine counters. Copper pots hung in shining rows. A 6-burner range big enough to roast a small kingdom. Somebody had set a bowl of lemons on the table, so bright they looked indecent against all that old wood. Teresa glanced up from her coffee. You have the face of a woman who met a ghost. Just bad sleep, she snorted. In this family, those are cousins. I made espresso because my hands needed a task. Then I took out my mother's recipe book and laid it on the table where the morning light was strongest. 3 things had been bothering me since yesterday. The numbers in the margins. The fact that my father used balance in the measurements. And Dante's face when I said shifted, not wrong. People think pastry is softness because it ends in sweetness. It is. It is discipline disguised as comfort. Ratios, heat, timing, change 1 gram and the whole lie collapses. I went page by page. Orange almond tort, pistachio sponge, bittersweet mousse. At first the penciled adjustment seemed random. Then not. Every reduced quantity matched an increase on another page. Flour, sugar, butter, salt, transfers, accounts moving invisibly between recipes. Dante came in while I was warming a knife over the stove. His gaze went from the blade to my face. Should I be concerned? Only if your uncle liked lemon oil. That got his attention. I held 1 page over the steam of the kettle. Nothing happened for 2 seconds. Then faint brown writing bled through the paper between my mother's neat lines of ink. Teresa went very still. My father's hand, smaller than I remembered, more hurried. Acid wakes the saints. Trust no brother at your back. Dante was beside me before the last word fully surfaced. The movement was so fast I felt wind from it. He took the page carefully, as if force might erase what it had waited years to say. "Do it again," he said. We did. By the 5th page, a pattern emerged. Heat, citrus oil, invisible notes hidden between dessert instructions, dates, offshore transfers, a warehouse in Red Hook, another in Newark. A shell foundation used to move money through Dante's own charities, and one initial appearing again and again like a nail driven crooked through everything. V.S. Vittorio Salvator. The room seemed to change shape around that name. "My father was hiding this," I said. "Yes, from your family." Dante's eyes stayed on the pages. From one part of it, fast mystery, there it was. My father had not stolen. He had witnessed, hidden, tried to move around a man too powerful to accuse directly. My chest ached with vindication and grief so tangled I could not separate them. Why didn't he go to the police? Teresa made a sound with no humor in it. Because men like Vittorio sat beside judges at fundraisers and paid for police widows' roofs. Dante turned another page. More notes surfaced. "Lucia moved tonight. East door compromised. If this reaches D, don't let her wait outside." His hand stopped. I looked at the line again, certain I had misread it. I hadn't. "Lucia," the room hollowed out. "Your father tried to warn me," Dante said, and for the first time since I'd met him, his voice carried something close to damage. The message never got to me. I could not breathe properly for a second. My father had not only died with the truth hidden in recipes, he had tried to save Dante's sister. "I'm sorry," I said. The words were useless. They were also the only honest ones I had. Dante's jaw worked once. "So am I," that would have been enough for one morning. It was. Teresa reached for my coat, which had been draped over a chair to dry near the stove. "There's a tear in the lining," she said. "I'll mend it before we leave." My blood went cold. "Don't." Too late. She had already turned the hem back. Something thin and sealed slid free and landed on the table with a papery whisper. A recipe card, the missing one. Nobody spoke. I stared at it like it belonged to someone smaller and more foolish than me. Dante did not move, which was worse than anger. "I was 13, I said, hearing how bad it sounded. "My mother found it loose after he died. She made me promise that if anyone ever asked about the book, I would never bring them everything at once." "Did you know what it was?" Dante asked. "No, that isn't what I asked." I swallowed. I knew it mattered. The silence after that had weight. I had wanted the truth. I had also hoarded part of it for years because fear teaches strange forms of obedience. Because my mother was dying in front of me, and her hand had shaken while she made me swear. Because I did not trust powerful men with dead fathers or living faces. Dante picked up the card. Invisible writing surfaced under the heat still trapped in the room. A final note. Short. Brutal. "If V finds the girl, he will use her. D must know Alina lives. Lives, not lived." Dante had known my name because my father had written it for him years ago. The floor seemed to shift under me. Before I could ask the 1,000 questions tearing at me, Marco came in hard from the hallway. Her room was searched. Teresa swore in Italian. I stood so fast the chair tipped. "What?" "Window latch cut from outside," Marco said. "Whoever came in went through her bag, the dresser, under the mattress." They were looking for paper. Dante's eyes moved to the missing card in his hand. Inside help. Again, he looked at Marco. "Who had rotation?" "Alessio signed the night change." A tiny pause. "Barely anything. But I saw it. Alessio Romano. I had met him once yesterday in the city, broad smile, immaculate suit, a friendliness too polished to trust and too easy to prove false. He had kissed Teresa's cheek and called Dante cousin, though I had noticed no warmth in it. "Bring him in," Dante said. Marco hesitated. "He left at dawn." There it was, not proof, worse, absence. Dante closed his hand around the card. When he opened it again, his palm was marked with the imprint of his own ring where he had clenched too hard. I stepped forward before good sense could catch me. "You already suspected someone." His gaze met mine. I understood then, not the details, not all of it, but enough. He had known there was betrayal in his house and still brought me here because there had been nowhere safer, which meant nowhere safe at all. Pack, he said. For where? Back to the city. That sounds insane. It is. He held my stare another second, then added, quietly enough that it seemed meant only for me, stay where I can see you. Little stray, almost. Not a confession, not safety, but close enough to burn. I looked at the missing card on the table, at my father's last warning, at the shape Dante's grief had taken over years and blood and locked doors. Marco, Dante said, all steel again, no one moves without my word. Marco nodded once. Then he said the thing that turned the whole morning into a blade. The rear gate opened from inside. We did not make it back to Manhattan in one piece. The convoy left the lake house just after noon under a sky too bright for the mood in the cars. Marco drove the lead SUV. Nico drove ours because, in his words, if I'm going to die in tactical traffic, I'd at least like control of the playlist. There was no music playing. Dante sat beside me in the back. The missing card stayed inside his jacket like a second heartbeat. I kept my mother's recipe book on my lap and watched the road unspool through tinted glass. No one talked for the first hour. Then Nico said into the silence, I just want the record to show that I skipped breakfast for this. From the passenger seat, Marco's voice crackled through the radio. You ate 2 egg sandwiches. Stress breakfast doesn't count. Why? Because the body doesn't retain calories consumed under emotional siege. I put a hand over my mouth. Dante looked at me. Not sternly, not even remotely gently, but there was that almost smile again, so brief I would have thought I imagined it if Nico hadn't muttered, see. Even she knows suffering when she hears it. The first bullet hit the windshield of the lead car like a fist from God. Glass starred, Marco swore, tires screamed. Nico jerked the wheel so hard my shoulder slammed into Dante's chest. Then everything broke open. Gunfire cracked from the treeline. Our car fishtailed on wet asphalt. Dante shoved me down across the seat before I could understand the angle of danger. His body covered mine in one clean movement, one arm braced above my head, the other already drawing a gun from under his jacket. I heard 3 shots from him, measured, not frantic, not wasted. The rear window exploded. Nico shouted, I hate this road, I hate this county, I hate cardio. Drive, Dante said. We spun sideways anyway. The SUV hit the shoulder, clipped a guardrail, and died in a cough of steam. For half a second there was only breathing. Then Dante was out of the car, dragging my door open, hauling me with him into the ditch. Mud soaked my knees. The world smelled like gasoline, hot metal, and spring earth torn open. Run when I tell you, he said. I'm not leaving. Alina. It was not loud, it never had to be. He fired again, dropped one man I never saw clearly, and pushed me toward the stone remains of a small roadside chapel, half hidden behind overgrown yews. Nico stumbled in after us, somehow still in loafers. This is a terrible day to die well-dressed. Marco came limping through the side entrance a second later with blood running down his sleeve. Marco, not mine, he said. It was a lie. Teresa would have heard it instantly. So did I. The chapel was roofed but abandoned, all damp wood and old saints with their faces worn smooth by time. Candles had long since melted into the altar in fossilized drips. Dante kicked the door shut and shoved a splintered pew against it. 2 left, Marco said. 3, Dante answered. You saw one. I smelled his cigarette. Nico actually looked offended. This is why I can't relax around him. Outside, footsteps circled the stone walls. Inside, Dante took Marco's gun, checked the magazine, handed it back. Efficient. Calm, terrifying. I tore a strip from the hem of my sweater and caught Marco's arm before he could object. The bullet had gone through the meat of his upper arm. Bad, not catastrophic if we kept the bleeding down, he hissed when I tied the pressure wrap. You've done this before, he said. Bakery burns. Knife slips. My mother had weak hands at the end. I tightened the knot. Hold still. Dante watched me. That look again, the one from the rain, the one from the hallway. As if every time I touched an injury instead of flinching from it, something old and locked inside him shifted 1 inch and hated him for moving. The door shuddered under impact. Nico crossed himself. If I survive, I'm eating pasta tonight. Dante moved to the side of the door. When it opens, stay behind the altar. I can help, I said. You can live. The phrase hit too low. The door burst inward. The next 10 seconds happened faster than thought. One attacker came through high, gun first. Dante shot him center mass before his boot hit the stone. The second came low through the broken side window. Marco dropped him with his offhand and nearly collapsed after. The third was the one Dante had smelled. He came behind me. I did not see him. I felt Dante. He crossed the room like violence, remembering its name. By the time I turned, the man was on the floor and Dante had his wrist bent backward with a precision so controlled it was worse than rage. No shouting, no threat, one twist, one shot, done. Blood spotted the chapel floor under a chipped angel. I stared. This was the full extent of what he was, not brutal because he enjoyed it. Brutal because he could be exact at speeds ordinary men never reached, and there was no softness in him while he did it. He looked up at me over the body. Elena, my name in his mouth sounded like an order trying very hard not to become concerned. I'm fine, I said. It came out broken. He crossed the distance between us and stopped so close my breath caught. His hand rose, hovered by my face, dropped again, restraint, again. That was the third almost. Outside, sirens far off. Ours or someone else's, impossible to know. Nico wisely turned around and began talking to the saints about carbohydrates. Dante took my wrist. His thumb pressed lightly where his ring had marked me in the dark last night. You're shaking. So are you. He looked down, almost startled to find it true. I said the thing that cost me. I don't know what's happening to me when you look at me like that. Silence, not empty, full enough to drown in. His hand tightened once on my wrist, then gentled. Little stray, he said, and this time the name carried warning, hunger, and something dangerously close to tenderness. If I start something here, I won't finish it the way you deserve. My eyes burned. I didn't even know why. Fear, relief, want, the humiliation of not knowing where to put any of it. I'm not asking for, I know. He touched my cheek then, barely, like the contact hurt him more than denial did. And then, because the whole ruined chapel had already become a place where impossible things happened, he bent and kissed me. Nothing greedy, nothing claimed. A slow, careful press of his mouth to mine that felt like being chosen by fire and handled like glass at the same time. When he pulled back, I stayed there breathing his air. Dante, it was the handkerchief in the rain. That was the truth of it, not her face. Not the way she looked at him like she might hate him and trust him in the same breath. It was the impossible mercy of her kneeling on broken pavement, palm bleeding, binding the hand of the boy who shoved her. In Dante's world, pain produced debt, revenge, leverage. In hers, it still made room for pity. He had wanted her from the moment he understood that. He had been stopping himself ever since. A phone buzzed in his pocket. He checked the screen. One photo. Lucia's ballet slipper on the floor of the lake house, placed upright inside the locked room. Vittorio's message came beneath it. War has arrived. By the time we got back to the city, the war had learned our address. The penthouse was no longer pretending to be a home. Men rotated through the halls with earpieces and compact rifles hidden under jackets too expensive to soften them. The elevators were locked to biometric access. The kitchen stayed open because Teresa refused to let fear dictate mealtimes, which, according to her, was how men ended up morally weak and constipated. Marco got stitched in the library by Bianca Ferrero, the family doctor and attorney, because apparently in Dante's world specialties blurred when loyalty mattered. She was cool-eyed, elegantly severe, and the first person besides Teresa who looked at me as if I might be making an informed choice rather than simply being swallowed. You should leave while he still lets you, she said quietly while rewrapping Marco's bandage. It was not unkind. Across the room, Dante spoke into two phones at once and looked like the eye of a storm deciding who did not deserve tomorrow. I should have listened to Bianca. Instead, I went to the kitchen and made pastry, not because I was calm, because I was not. Sugar does not care if your heart is in pieces. Butter does not ask whether the man you kissed in a ruined chapel can order men killed before lunch and still touch your face like a confession. Measurements save you from yourself for a while. Teresa found me piping mascarpone into chew shells with more force than necessary. That filling didn't insult your mother, she said. I exhaled. Sorry. Don't apologize to the cream. Explain yourself to me. I set down the bag. If I leave now, it feels like I'm abandoning something. What? I thought of the chapel, of Dante's hand on my wrist. Of the note in my father's recipe book telling a man named D not to let Lucia wait outside. Of the fact that my father had tried to save someone and still died branded a thief. I don't know yet, I admitted. Teresa's face softened and hardened at the same time, as if both reactions had lived together in her for years. That is the most dangerous kind. The attack came at dusk, not on the penthouse, on me. Marco insisted I needed air and took me down to the private courtyard one level below the lobby, walled in marble, and planted with clipped yews so precise they looked punished. I had been outside for less than a minute when a bakery box appeared on the stone bench beside me. No courier, no footsteps, just there. Marco saw it at the same moment I did. His whole body changed. Inside, he said, the box had my name written on the top in my mother's handwriting. My blood stopped. It wasn't hers. It couldn't be. But whoever had done it knew exactly where to press. Marco shoved me behind him and reached for the lid. A shot cracked from the parking ramp above. He turned on instinct. The bullet meant for my throat tore through his side. The sound that came out of me didn't feel human. Marco hit the ground hard, breath punched out, one hand still reaching backward as if to keep me behind him even from the floor. Everything after that moved too quickly and far too clearly. Guards flooding the courtyard, shouts in Italian, a second shot, Dante appearing at the top of the stairwell like judgment in a dark coat. He did not run. Men made room before he got there. He looked at Marco once. At the blood. At me. Then he looked up toward the parking ramp. I had never seen a face go that still. Take her upstairs, he said. No, I said. Nobody listened. Bianca dragged me backward while I fought her, Marco bleeding on the stone, the bakery box abandoned between us. When the lid finally blew open under a bomb-tech's gloved hand, sugar roses spilled across the bench and rolled into blood. Inside the box was one thing, a severed goose head. Nico, when he heard later, went white and sat down very abruptly. I knew those birds were connected to organized crime. No one laughed. Not then. Marco survived surgery. Barely. I sat outside the medical suite with blood on my sleeves and Dante's silence across from me like another man in the hall. He had changed clothes. That was all the evidence he gave that the last 2 hours had contained violence, but I noticed the dark smear still caught under one thumbnail. I noticed his knuckles split open again. I noticed everything about him because I was trying very hard not to notice one thing. I felt safest with him sitting there covered in somebody else's ruin. That was when the danger moved inside me. Stage 2, I knew it even then. It wasn't him I was afraid of anymore. It was what safety meant when it wore his face. Bianca came out first. Marco will live, she said. If no one excites him. Nico, sitting on the opposite wall with his face in his hands, looked up. Then obviously I can't visit. Dante stood. Leave us. When the hall emptied, he handed me an envelope. Inside was a passport, a bank card, cash, and a printed email. Lucille Patisserie, Paris, final apprenticeship offer. My stomach dropped. I had applied 6 months ago in a burst of private stupidity and grief, back when a future still felt like something you could mail yourself toward. I never got this, I whispered. I know, my head came up. You intercepted it. I had your mail watched. The betrayal of that should have hit first. Instead, what I felt was stranger, messier. He had known my name for longer than I understood, longer than I could measure. He had placed men around the edges of my life without stepping into it. Why? His jaw tightened. No answer, of course. You get one clean road out of this, he said. Bianca will take you to Teterboro, Montreal tonight, Paris after, new apartment, new papers if you want them. Your father's name will be cleared within 48 hours. What about Marco? What about me? He asked, and there it was, not anger exactly, the thing under it. You stay, more people bleed. It was the closest he had come to asking me to go. I should have taken the envelope and hated him for making sense. Instead I said, you don't get to decide what I can live with. No, he said quietly. I decide what I can. Bianca drove me to the airfield in total silence, broken only by rain needling against the car windows. I held the envelope the entire way. At the private terminal, a jet waited under floodlights, sleek and obscene and real enough to take me somewhere my body might unclench. Paris, butter, early mornings, sugar on stainless steel. A future in which men did not keep ballet slippers in locked rooms and say my name like a threat to themselves. I got out of the car, walked 10 steps, 15, then I stopped. Because Marco had bled for me. Because Teresa was still in that kitchen. Because Nico would make jokes until the ceiling fell in and then apologize to the ceiling for the inconvenience. Because my father had died trying to get the truth to a man who still stood in doorways remembering who he had failed. And because Dante had given me a way out, not to get rid of me, but because wanting me there cost him too much. I turned around. Bianca looked at me through the open car door for one long second. This will end your old life, she said. I know, she nodded once. I got back in, and I went back. When I returned to the penthouse, the building felt wrong, not dangerous in the obvious way. Too quiet in the wrong places. The kind of hush that meant the fear had been tidied, not resolved. Bianca let me up through a private service entrance Dante rarely used. He's in the conference room with the capos, she said. If you're going to make this reckless decision, at least do it quickly. I almost smiled. Almost. The elevator opened on the residential floor. No Marco at the hall. No low murmur from the kitchen. No Teresa swearing at the oven in Sicilian. Just the distant hum of climate control and my own footsteps. I knew something was wrong before I saw him. Alessio Romano stood outside Dante's office with his hands loosely folded and a smile too relieved to be genuine. Elena, he said. Thank God. I stopped. He wore no jacket, no tie, just a white shirt rolled at the elbows and blood on one cuff. Where's Dante? Handling a problem downstairs. Come with me. Every instinct I had sharpened over the last week rose at once. No, his smile thinned. Don't make me do this in the hallway. The gun appeared only after the sentence had finished, as if he considered manners part of professionalism. I looked at the elevator behind me. Too far. Alessio sighed. I told Vittorio you'd be difficult in quiet ways. There it was, traitor, not one of Dante's men turned by money at the gate, not a faceless guard. Alessio, who kissed Teresa's cheek and brought imported apricots because she once mentioned missing them in winter. Alessio, who knew every rotation, every blind spot, every private elevator. The betrayal had weight because he had belonged there. Why? I asked. He laughed softly. Because Dante still thinks blood should mean something. It doesn't. It means access. He took my arm. I fought him, harder than I thought I could. Elbow, heel, teeth if necessary. I did not break free, but I made him work for it. That mattered to me more than it did to him. He shoved me into the service elevator and pressed a keycard I had never seen. It went down, past the lobby, past the garage, past what I had thought was the bottom of the building. The doors opened into an old storage level that smelled like concrete, dust, and river damp. Before the penthouse towered over Manhattan, there had been a bakery distribution floor on this footprint. That history clung to the walls in strange places, rusted rack hooks, a broken rolling bin, old tile painted over badly enough that you could still see flower ghosts in the grout. My father would have noticed that first. That thought hurt. Alessio locked me in a room that had once been a refrigeration chamber. Cold, white tile, one naked bulb. The boss will meet you soon, he said. Vittorio isn't my boss. No, Alessio said. He's the man who understands that sentiment gets people killed. When he left, I took inventory. No windows. One vent, a drain in the floor, a wooden chair, a shelf with old ledger boxes warped by damp, and on the far wall, half covered by flaking paint, the faded outline of a Saint Michael. Sword raised, I laughed once, not because anything was funny, because the alternative was panic, and panic wastes oxygen. I sat on the floor and listened. Above me, life continued. Faint machinery. Pipes, once a muffled elevator. Time became ugly and loose. When Vittorio finally came in, he looked enough like Dante to make my stomach turn. Older, obviously, silver at the temples. A softer body gone elegant with age instead of hard. But the same stillness used as weapon, the same refusal to move too much when everyone else could do it for you. Now I understood the mirror. He sat the chair backward and folded his arms over its backrest, as if we were two civilized people discussing wine. "Your father was a loyal fool," he said. "My father was better than you. Much," Vittorio nodded as if agreeing with Weather. That was the problem. He did not monologue, he didn't need to. Men like him trusted implication more than speeches. "I don't have the card," I said. "I know, Dante does." He studied me a second. "You went back." "Yes, interesting." His gaze sharpened. "Do you know why Dante frightens men, Elena? Not because he's cruel, because once he wasn't cruel enough. He loved a sister more than the structure protecting her. He hesitated. Men died. Then she died. Now he thinks mercy can be scheduled and compartmentalized." Vittorio tilted his head. "I raised him better than that." A chill moved through me that had nothing to do with the room. "You killed her," he smiled without warmth. "I opened a door he should have closed sooner." Mirror, there it was again, not chaos, philosophy. Dante feared becoming a man who could say that sentence and still sleep. Vittorio rose. "You matter because Matteo wrote your name where Dante could see it. He will come. And when he does, I'll know exactly how far sentiment has rotted his judgment." After he left, I forced my breathing steady. I would not break in the cold room. I would not be the easy part of someone else's lesson. I stood, checked the drain, loose screws on the vent, the ledger boxes. Inside one warped box I found twine, an old metal bakery tag, and a broken thermometer. Thin glass, sharp enough if pressed right. Bakery rooms had taught me many things. Cold storage most of all. Locks freeze, metal contracts. Old hinges hate sudden heat. The bulb above me was hot. It took time and skin and patience I did not know I possessed. But I shattered the thermometer, used a shard to strip the wires from the bulb fixture, sparked them against the corroded latch housing, and waited until the metal popped just enough to matter. When the door opened 3 inches, Alessio was on the other side. He smiled down at the gap. "I was beginning to respect you." I slammed the edge into his hand. He swore, the gun clattering once against tile. I kicked for it. He kicked me harder. Pain lit my ribs. Still, the gun slid across the floor and under the shelf. Not mine, not his either. For 1 second, then voices thundered above us. Gunfire, distant but real. "Dante." Alessio grabbed my throat and dragged me into the corridor. "Too late," he said into my ear, half panicked now. He took the bait. He shoved me against the wall and raised the gun toward the stairwell as footsteps pounded closer. The last thing I heard before the lights cut out was Dante shouting my name. And the worst part was this. I didn't know whether he would reach me in time or whether he would burn the whole building trying. The lights did not stay out for long. Emergency strips kicked on near the floor, throwing the corridor into a low red glow that made every face look like it had already done something unforgivable. Alessio kept one arm across my throat, and the gun jammed hard under my jaw. We backed toward a freight lift at the far end of the basement hall while the building shook with running men and muffled shots from the stairwell. "Move," he hissed. My ribs screamed with each step. I let them. Fear sharpens, that's the lie. Sometimes it also narrows. I could think of only 3 things. The metal taste in my mouth, the weight of Alessio's breath at my temple, and the service map I had seen on the wall when he dragged me in. Old bakery distribution floor, freight lift to loading tunnels, tunnels to the river. That meant only one thing. If he got me to the dockside warehouse attached to this old foundation, Dante would have to choose between storming a kill box or letting us vanish onto the water. So I stopped helping my own body stay upright. I let my knees go soft. Alessio swore and hauled me harder. The gun shifted a fraction. Enough. I stamped backward on his foot, threw my weight down, and drove my head into his mouth. Pain burst white behind my eyes. He lost grip for one glorious, clumsy second. I ran, not far. 10 steps, maybe 12, before he caught my hair and yanked me sideways through an open loading door into a cavernous space that smelled like rust, wet cardboard, and old sugar. The warehouse. Abandoned racks towered over us. Conveyor belts slept under tarps. A cracked sign near the wall still read Bellini Baking Distribution beneath newer paint. My father's name. Alessio saw me notice. Yes, he panted, wiping blood from his lip. Vittorio kept the property, sentimental after all. He shoved me toward an old packing table bolted to the floor. I grabbed the first thing my hand found. A pastry torch. Empty, useless. No, not useless. The canister beside it still had weight. He laughed when he saw what I held. Are you going to brûler me to death? Depends how long you talk. The line surprised him enough that his smile slipped. Good. From the far end of the warehouse came shouts. Men, many, closer. Alessio grabbed my arm again and dragged me behind a stack of flour pallets gone stone-hard with damp. If he comes through that door, you scream. You tell him to drop the gun. If he doesn't, I put one in your spine. Simple. I did not answer. I was done helping men simplify me. I twisted the canister loose, with my thumb the way I had seen my old sous chef do 100 times. Gas hissed faintly into the air between us. Alessio didn't hear it over the gunfire moving nearer through the loading bay. Then the warehouse doors blew inward. Dante came through first, not because leaders should. Because he was past caring about should. He moved through the red dark space with a terrifying absence of hesitation, gun low, eyes everywhere. Marco came behind him, pale from blood loss but upright. Nico was somehow there too, in a bulletproof vest over a black dress shirt, carrying spare magazines and looking personally offended by the concept of heroism. I want noted, Nico shouted over the chaos, that I am doing this in loafers. Even like that, even then, my chest hurt with relieved laughter I could not make. Alessio jammed the gun harder into my side. Drop it, Dante saw us, everything in him locked. He did not lower his weapon, he did not rush. He only stopped, and the whole warehouse seemed to hold its breath with him. Elena, he said, not a question, not a reassurance, a line thrown across fire. I tasted gas on the air and knew I had one chance. Don't, I said. It sounded like panic. I made sure it did. Alessio smiled shakily, thinking he had me. Tell him. My thumb flicked the pastry torch wheel. Flame jumped blue, the gas between us caught with a soft, violent whoomp. Alessio screamed and jerked back, more startled than burned, but startled was enough. I dropped under his arm. Dante fired once. Alessio hit the concrete hard and did not get back up. The world blurred, then steadied around Dante's hands on my shoulders. He checked my throat, my ribs, my face, as if confirming shape and blood and reality. His own breathing was wrecked in a way I had never seen. He touched my cheek, my hair, my wrist, where the St. Michael ring knocked softly against my pulse as his hand closed there. Almost. Then not almost, I stepped into him. He made a low sound that did something permanent to me, and folded me against his chest with one arm, the other still holding the gun aimed over my shoulder at the room, because this was his love now. If it was anything, shelter with violence still in his hand. For 1 second, I let my forehead rest under his chin and knew, with a clarity that frightened me, that I had already chosen. Nico turned away theatrically. Thank you, Lord, for timing. But if anyone else wants a reunion, schedule it after I change shoes. Marco, leaning against a support column with his injured side bound tight, gave me the smallest nod. Acceptance. Warmth in his own brutal language. Then Vittorio's voice came through the warehouse speakers. Of course he had speakers. Family should never embrace in a distribution room, he said, dry as old paper. It feels low rent. Dante's arms loosened, not from me, around me, repositioning me behind him. Come out, he said. Vittorio did not. Tomorrow, St. Michael Chapel on Mulberry, noon, bring the card. Bring the girl if she insists on being part of this tragedy. Or I release the Bellini accounts, the Salvetter accounts, and the footage of your sisters last night to every federal desk in the city. My whole body went cold. Dante went colder. Careful, Vittorio said softly through the speakers. This is where a man decides whether love is rot or reason. The line clicked dead. No applause, no drama. Just the hum of old wiring and Nico muttering, I hate elderly villains, they have hobbies. Dante turned to me. His face was unreadable to anyone who did not know him. I knew enough now. He was at an emotional breaking point he would rather bleed through than show. I touched his split knuckles. He caught my hand in his. Don't, he said. I'm here. I know. That was not comfort. It was worse. It was truth. Dante he had suspected Alessio from the gate rotation, from the absent dawn, from the way the man spoke too easily around grief. He had not moved sooner because proof mattered when blood did, and because part of him, the part Vittorio had trained and Lucia had ruined, still mistook patience for control. Now Alina stood alive in front of him with soot on her wrist and courage in her throat, and Dante understood something he had spent weeks refusing. If Vittorio made him choose between the Empire and the girl who bandaged injured hands on instinct, the Empire was already losing. By the time we left the warehouse, both of us knew the same thing. One of us might not survive noon. Mulberry Street looked respectable in daylight. That was the problem with cities like ours. They learned to stack brutality behind clean facades and call it history. St. Michael Chapel sat wedged between a shuttered tailor shop and a florist whose awning had survived 3 administrations, 2 mob wars, and 1 fire nobody discussed. Small brick church. Iron gate, steps worn hollow at the center by generations of knees and weather. By 11:30, Dante had men on every roofline and still looked like a man walking toward a knife he had sharpened himself. I wore black because everyone else did. It felt less like mourning than camouflage. Teresa adjusted my collar in the sacristy with hard, practical fingers. If he tells you to run, run. If you tell me to run, I'll tell you louder. Nico stood nearby in a dark suit that fit him too well for the amount of complaining he did about bread. He handed me a small paper bag. For morale. Inside were almond cookies. I looked up. He shrugged. Teresa made them and threatened me with death if I ate even one. So obviously I risked my life transporting them to the correct woman. Teresa rolled her eyes. I made 20. He stole 6. Because sacrifice is my love language. I laughed, brief and helpless and terribly grateful. The sound steadied me more than prayer could have. Marco took position at the side entrance, pale but vertical, which in his case counted as optimism. Bianca checked the weapon hidden at my back and met my eyes. You do not need to prove anything in there. Too late for that. The missing card lay inside Dante's breast pocket, my father's final truth, numbers, names, transfers, dates. Enough to ruin Vittorio in every direction that mattered. Enough to ruin Dante, too, if handled wrong. The chapel filled by noon with capos, lawyers, men whose cufflinks cost more than my childhood apartment, and old women lighting candles, because this city had always known religion and organized crime were cousins once removed. Vittorio came through the main doors smiling as if he'd paid for the marble personally. He saw me first. Of course he did. Alina, he said. The Bellinis do enjoy returning to dangerous kitchens. Dante stepped between us without seeming to move much. That was his dominance. No speeches, just geography. The world arranged itself around what he would or would not allow. Enough, he said. Vittorio's gaze flicked to the card line beneath Dante's jacket. You brought it. I brought your ending. Vittorio almost smiled. Then we agree. What followed was not a duel. Men like them did not waste time on theatrics when history itself could be weaponized. Dante handed the card not to Vittorio but to Bianca. Murmurs moved through the pews. "She reads it aloud," Dante said. "Now." Vittorio's expression changed for the first time. Bianca unfolded the card and began. Transfers, foundations, judges bought through memorial funds, port inspectors paid in cash routed through children's cancer galas. My father's notes naming shell companies and dates. And there, near the end, one last line in invisible ink that surfaced under the heat Bianca held near the page. "If I die," Vittorio opened the east door. Lucia ran to the street alone. The chapel inhaled. Dante did not. Vittorio's mask cracked not with guilt but irritation. Matteo was always sentimental with details. That was his mistake, not the admission, the disdain, because I saw something pass through the room then, not morality, not even pity, disgust. Old men who had tolerated corruption shifting in their pews, because there are rules even wolves understand. And sending a girl to die outside a locked door offended the part of them still superstitious enough to fear judgment. Vittorio saw it too, so he reached for the gun. He moved fast for his age. Dante moved faster. The first shot shattered a saint's plaster hand. The second took out one of Vittorio's men at the aisle. Then the chapel dissolved into splintering wood, screaming candles, bodies hitting pews, Marco dragging a wounded capo behind stone, Nico shouting. "This is why normal people brunch." Someone grabbed my arm from behind. Wrong hand, wrong ring, wrong temperature. I drove Bianca's pistol backward, without looking, and heard a grunt. Then spun and fired low, the way Marco had shown me in a service corridor at 3 a.m, while pretending not to care whether I listened. The man went down clutching his thigh. Across the chapel, Vittorio had Dante pinned behind the third pew from the altar, while 2 remaining gunmen cut off the side aisle. I saw the angle before Dante did, or maybe he saw it and knew he couldn't move in time. My father had hidden patterns in recipes. My whole life I had learned to find the line under the obvious one. I climbed onto the pew. Someone shouted my name. Maybe 3 people did. I kicked the iron candle stand nearest the side aisle. It toppled into the runner. Fire leaped fast and ugly through centuries of wax drippings. Smoke surged. Men cursed and turned instinctively away from open flame. The line to Dante broke. He came up through it like the answer to a prayer nobody deserved. 2 shots, 1 body, then Vittorio, close enough now that I could see the age in his face, the intelligence, the contempt. Close enough to see Dante look at him not like an enemy, but like a future he had spent years refusing. "Don't," Vittorio said softly, and for the first time the word held something almost human. "If you kill me here, you become exactly what I made." Dante's gun stayed level. "No," he said, "I become what you couldn't." He pulled the trigger. The sound seemed to empty the whole chapel of air. Vittorio went down on the steps beneath St. Michael, blood moving dark across stone. No speeches, no final curse, just a body and a history ending badly. The last gunman bolted for the side door. Marco dropped him from 20 feet away with 1 clean shot, and had to brace himself against the wall after. Nico immediately yelled, "Someone compliment him before he faints artistically." Then it was over except for all the parts that weren't. Smoke, crying, sirens, Bianca kneeling beside a wounded priest. Teresa pressing a linen cloth to a capo's shoulder while insulting his mother for raising him fragile. My own hands, shaking around an empty gun. Dante stood in front of his dead uncle looking less victorious than altered. This was the cost, not that he had killed. He had done that before. That he had killed the man who raised him and refused to let that man define the act. He turned when I touched his sleeve. For a second, just one, his face gave me everything he would not let anyone else see. Grief, fury, relief so sharp it bordered on pain. I took his hand. Blood, gunpowder, the cool edge of the scent. "Michael, ring." "It's over," I whispered. His fingers closed around mine like a man relearning the shape of staying. Then, because truth mattered and endings required witness, he said it aloud to the room, to the body, to himself. "It is over. War did not end cleanly." It ended in smoke, trapped inside velvet curtains, in lawyers speaking softly over blood-stained ledgers, in men with old loyalties, choosing where to stand now that Vittorio Salvator was a body under stone and not a voice behind it. For 3 weeks, the penthouse belonged to recovery. Marco moved slower but complained at exactly the same speed, which Teresa said was the clearest sign he would live. Bianca came and went with files tucked under one arm and tired judgment in her eyes, dismantling Vittorio's shell companies one legal artery at a time. The newspapers called the chapel shooting a private security incident, which was how rich cities described sins too expensive to name aloud. Nico treated all of it as a personal inconvenience. "I am just saying," he announced one morning from the kitchen doorway, "if we are rebuilding a criminal empire under more ethical management, there should be better snacks." Teresa didn't look up from the pot she was stirring. "Ethical management begins with your mouth closed." He pressed a hand to his chest. "You wound me in front of witnesses." Marco, seated at the table with his side still bandaged and his patience already fully restored, said, "We all prayed for it." I laughed before I meant to. Nico pointed at me as if presenting evidence to a jury. "See, she understands me." "I have always said Alina is the only refined person in this building." "You said that after she gave you cannoli," Teresa replied. "And I stand by the purity of my principles." The kitchen had become the center of everything, not the conference room, not Dante's office. The kitchen, where men with guns lowered their voices because Teresa hated shouting near dough, and where grief could sit at the table if it behaved itself. I had started baking there every morning. Not because I belonged, not yet, because my hands still knew what to do when my heart did not. That day I was glazing small lemon cakes with a brush so fine it felt like painting over a wound. Dante came in midway through the second tray and stopped in the doorway the way he always did, as if a room should have 1 second to prepare for him. It still affected people, probably always would. He wore no tie, just a charcoal shirt with the sleeves rolled and fatigue sitting under his cheekbones like a shadow that had moved in permanently. Since the chapel, he had become quieter in a way that made the entire household gentler around him, not because they feared him more, because they understood the cost of the silence. His gaze went first to my hands, then to the cakes, then to me. "What are those?" he asked. "Lemon olive oil," Nico brightened. "For mourning or celebration?" "Neither," Teresa sniffed. "That means both." Dante stepped closer to the counter. He had been doing that more often, coming near without pretending he had not meant to. The scent. Michael ring flashed when he rested his hand on the marble. That cool silver had become its own language between us. Warning, comfort, restraint, all in one small circle of metal. I brushed glaze over the final cake. "There for the staff downstairs too." Nico looked personally moved. "This is what leadership looks like," Marco said dryly. "Leadership would be letting other people eat first." Dante's mouth shifted almost into a smile. Almost. There were still so many almosts between us. Less than before, more than I could bear easily. At night he came to my room and sat at the edge of the bed talking about logistics, port access, Marco's recovery, Teresa's refusal to let anyone skip meals. He touched my wrist, my hair, the line of my shoulder with a care that still startled me. Sometimes he kissed me slow enough to make me forget my own name. Sometimes he stopped after that, forehead against mine, breathing hard as if restraint had become its own private injury. He had said "you're mine" only once, in the car back from the chapel, when blood was drying on both of us, and he pressed his mouth to my temple and murmured it like a verdict he hated needing. He had not repeated it. He did not need to. Everything he did now said it more dangerously than words. That evening, after the kitchen emptied and the city turned gold beyond the windows, I found him alone in the library. He stood by the bar cart, not drinking, one hand braced on the wood as if the room had shifted under him without permission. Lucia's ballet slipper sat in the glass case Bianca had insisted on moving from storage to here, where memory could be witness instead of trap. I leaned against the doorframe. "You're avoiding dinner," I ate. That is not what Teresa reported. His gaze cut to mine. She reports on me now. She files extensive grievances. A softer man might have laughed. Dante only exhaled through his nose. But I went to him anyway. The library smelled like paper, cedar, and the faint winter-clean scent that lived in his clothes after long nights outside. I stopped close enough to touch if invited. He looked tired, more than tired, stripped down to something honest and uneasy. What happened? I asked. 3 captains want Vittorio's old roots dissolved. 2 want them redistributed. 1 thinks I should marry for political optics before the quarter closes. That last part startled a laugh out of me. How romantic. I had a similar reaction. I touched his sleeve. And what do you want? Silence, long enough that I thought he might leave it there. Then, something I was not built for. My throat tightened. He looked down at my hand on his arm as if it had become heavier than guns. When Lucia died, I made a rule for myself, he said. Nothing before structure, nothing before the family standing, nothing that could be used against me because I chose it openly. I waited. He lifted his gaze. Then you came to my door bleeding and furious, and you bandaged the hand of the boy who put you on the pavement. There it was again, the why of me. The thing that had followed us through every room since the rain. You remember every detail of that, I said softly. I remember the exact shade of the cloth. Emotion moved through me so quickly I had to look away. He reached up, touched my chin, turned me back. I gave you an exit, he said. You came back. Yes, you saw exactly what my world costs. Yes, and you stayed. His voice had gone very quiet, dangerous only because it meant so much. Yes, I said again. Dante, he had buried men, buried loyalties, buried the last version of himself that thought love could survive inside order without being changed by it. But Alina stood in front of him, carrying light in her face and flower on one wrist. And Dante understood with a clarity more frightening than gunfire that he did not want a world arranged around survival if it did not contain her ordinary mess inside it. He pulled something from his pocket then, not a ring box. Of course not. Nothing about us had ever been simple enough for velvet. It was a key, old brass, heavy, worn smooth at the head. I stared at it. What is that? The east door at the lake house. The room seemed to stop breathing. The one Lucia? Yes. I looked up sharply. He kept the key in his open palm between us. The scent. Michael ring gleamed beside it. I replaced the lock the week after she died, he said. I kept the old key anyway. As punishment maybe, memory, I don't know. He swallowed once. Take it, I didn't move. Dante, if I ask this badly, forgive me, he said. I have never asked for anything in my life that mattered this much. Everything inside me went still. He did not kneel. He would have hated the performance of it. Instead, he stood exactly where he was, looking like a man about to step unarmed into fire. Stay, he said, not because it's easy. Not because I can make this clean. Stay and build whatever ordinary thing can survive in me after this. Stay and fight me when I deserve it. Stay and keep feeding half the people in this house because apparently that's how coups are prevented now. His mouth shifted faintly. Then the seriousness returned, deep and wrecking. Stay, Alina. Marry me. My eyes burned immediately, not from surprise, from the weight of how unpretty the question was. No fairy tale, no polished promise, just truth laid down without protection. You're asking me with a key, I whispered. I'm asking you with the only door I know how to hand someone. That undid me. I covered my mouth for one useless second, then lowered my hand because I wanted him to see everything. Yes, I said. His face did not transform. Dante wasn't built for easy radiance. But something in him released so completely it felt holier than joy. Yes, he asked, like pain had taught him to mistrust miracles. Yes. He closed his fingers around the key, then mine around both. The brass pressed warm from his hand into my palm. His ring brushed my wrist, cool against racing blood. Little stray, he said, and for the first time there was nothing cold in it at all. He kissed me then, slowly, like something earned, like a vow spoken in the language we had actually survived. Later, Teresa cried in the pantry where she thought no one could hear. Nico ran into a side table celebrating and tried to pretend he meant to. Marco shook my hand with solemn respect and then told Dante, "If you break this, I'll recover fully just to annoy you." The house, for one impossible hour, felt almost ordinary. And that night, long after everyone else had gone quiet, Dante left the library lamp burning and fell asleep with his hand over mine at the kitchen table. 9 months later, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Not empty silence, morning silence. The kind that belongs to kitchens before ovens fully wake, to city windows still silver with dawn, to a home that has learned the shape of its people and no longer startles at their footsteps. I stood barefoot on cold marble in the penthouse kitchen, with lemon zest under my nails, and a wedding band on my left hand that still sometimes caught me by surprise. Outside, Manhattan was blue-gray and half asleep. Inside, butter softened on the counter. Espresso breathed in the machine. A tray of almond rolls waited for their final glaze. Ordinary life, it turned out, was the most radical thing I had ever chosen. Not safe, never safe. Dante's world still moved under ours like a dark river. Men still came at strange hours to speak quietly in the office. There were still nights when he came home with that cold air in his coat, and something shuddered in his eyes. And I understood enough not to ask for the whole truth when the whole truth belonged to blood and structure, and a city older than both of us. But there was this too. Teresa complaining about delivery tomatoes as if produce quality were a moral collapse. Bianca teaching junior attorneys to fear her in 3 precise syllables. Marco healed enough to train recruits downstairs and secretly smuggle biscotti to the guards he pretended to dislike. Nico, gloriously and against all expectation, engaged to Teresa after proposing by saying, "If you refuse me, I'll become unbearable on purpose," to which she replied, "That would require change." He still feared birds. She still weaponized pasta. Love had not made our world gentle, it had only made it inhabited. I was brushing honey glaze over the warm rolls when Dante came in behind me without a sound. That still happened too. The entire city could feel him arrive. I often only knew because the air changed. He had loosened his tie but not removed it, which meant the morning had already tried him. His shirt sleeves were rolled. A small cut marked the ridge of his right hand. I turned immediately. "What happened?" "Paperwork," I stared. He glanced down at the cut as if seeing it for the first time. A box in the archive. A violent box. One with staples. I put the brush down. "Sit, Alina, sit." There are ways in which marriage altered Dante Salvator. He still frightened rooms into obedience by entering them. He still made decisions with the cold efficiency of a man who had learned too early what hesitation costs. But now, sometimes, when I used that tone, he sat. He lowered himself into the chair at the kitchen table, with the expression of a king tolerating insurgency. I opened the first aid drawer and came back with antiseptic, gauze, and the small scissors Teresa insisted I stop misplacing. Then I took his hand. The cut was shallow, embarrassingly domestic. It made my chest hurt anyway. He watched my fingers as I cleaned the blood away. The memory came over both of us at once. I knew because his hand changed in mine, not pulling away, only stilling with old recognition. Rain, pavement, my torn palm, a young guard's split knuckles, the beginning. "You're doing it again," he said quietly. I looked up. "Doing what?" His gaze held mine. "Taking care of the hand that belongs to the problem." My throat tightened so fast I could barely smile. "I'm married to the problem now. Unclear judgment on your part." I laughed under my breath and wrapped the gauze once around his hand, then again. When I tied it off, his thumb brushed the inside of my wrist, the cool edge of the scent. Michael ring skimmed my skin exactly where it had that first night outside the hotel, but nothing in it meant threat anymore. It meant home, warning, promise, history, all of it at once. I leaned against his shoulder. For a minute neither of us spoke. The almond rolls cooled behind me. Coffee hissed softly. Somewhere down the hall, Nico raised his voice about the impossible cruelty of portion control, and Teresa, told him marriage was not a medical exemption from vegetables. Dante's mouth touched my temple. I knew then, he said. I turned my face into his neck. At the hotel, when you tied the cloth around that guard's hand. His voice was low, roughened by memory. I didn't have words for it, only the certainty that if I let myself keep looking at you, nothing in my life would stay arranged. I thought of everything that had not. Lucia's key on our shared ring by the door. My father's name cleared in every ledger that mattered. The bakery scholarship Dante had funded in Matteo Bellini's honor under Bianca's brutal legal supervision, so no one could launder a single dollar through it. The Lake House East door repainted a quiet blue and left unlocked when we were there, not because fear was gone, but because ritual had changed shape. You were right, I said. That rarely needs confirmation. I pinched his good hand. He actually smiled. Small, real, mine. I got up to rescue the rolls before the glaze set too thick. He watched me move around the kitchen, the way he had watched me from the beginning, as if I were doing something he could not quite believe the world still produced. Flour on the counter. Hair pinned badly, bare feet cold on marble. Ordinary. I understood then what the unresolved thing would always be between us, not whether he loved me. I knew that now in every silence he chose to break for me, not whether I had chosen him consciously. I had, with open eyes, it was the cost. There are old versions of yourself that do not die all at once. They fade in layers. The girl who believed goodness meant staying untouched by darkness did not survive Dante. The woman who loved him did. I am still not sure on certain sleepless nights whether that was a loss, a becoming, or both. Maybe love like ours is always both. I brought the rolls to the table. He tore one open while it was still too hot, because patience had never improved him in domestic settings. Steam rose. Honey and almond sweetened the air. You'll burn yourself, I said. Probably. I sat across from him. Morning widened around us. He looked at the bandage on his hand, then at me. Little stray. The name settled between us warm as bread. Yes, I thought. Still. Even now, especially now. Outside, the city kept all its old teeth. Inside, he reached across the table, and I let him take my wrist, his ring cool against my pulse, the same gesture that opened our story and the same one that closed it. Changed by everything we had survived. And because some endings deserve to breathe one beat longer than the people inside them, I held his hand there and let the silence answer for both of us. Would you have chosen Dante and let the old version of yourself die for a love like that?